Was Lewis Hamilton selfish for denying the DRS to Charles Leclerc in Imola, or was he protecting something much more important for Ferrari? What happened that day goes far beyond a simple team order. Imola. Enzo and Dino Ferrari lay out dressed in red passion, not only because of the traditional Italian fans, but for the fervor unleashed before Lewis Hamilton's first race on Italian soil as a Ferrari pilot. The tension could be felt from the first measures of the weekend. The expectations were as high as the noise of the tifosi, which filled each tier waiting for a sport's redemption. But what was lived in the end was an episode that nobody saw, loaded with emotional nuances, technical errors and strategic decisions that momentarily fractured the cohesion of the Scuderia. In the center of everything, a radio message, a request, a negative and a truth that came too late. In the final turns of the Emilia Romagna 2025 Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc, aboard his SF25, was in a complicated position. Fighting to keep his place in the dot zone, he requested by something apparently simple, but that in practice he could alter the internal dynamics of the team. He asked Hamilton to reduce his speed so that he could benefit from the DRS. The objective was clear: use that aerodynamic advantage in the main line to defend against attacks and potentially approach a front group. But the answer from the Ferrari wall was immediate and resounding: no. That refusal lit a spark that quickly became a fire. From the official transmission to the fan forums, the conversation revolved around whether Hamilton was putting his personal ambition to teamwork. The cameras captured a visibly frustrated Leclerc, shaking their heads inside the helmet, and a centered, imperturbable Hamilton, with a look fixed on the horizon, alien or perhaps resigned to the storm that was coming. But what transformed this episode into something even more complex was what was known after the race. Leclerc explained that his request had been based on an error of interpretation of the data he received. His digital board was unconfined, showing erroneous information. He believed they were in the last round of the race. From that perspective, your application had all the meaning of the world. He saw Hamilton as an obstacle without the possibility of progressing and thought it was smarter to protect his current position. But reality was different. There were still several laps and Hamilton had plenty of rhythm to hunt Oscar Piastri, who at that time occupied third position. The podium was within reach. These types of errors are unusual, but when they occur in the context of Formula One, where each millisecond account and decisions are made under inhuman pressure, they can trigger devastating consequences. And that was precisely what happened. Because what seemed like an act of selfishness by Hamilton turned out to be, in reality, a strategic defense based on precise information. And what seemed like a logical request from Leclerc ended up being the product of a technical failure. This misunderstanding not only questioned internal relations within the Ferrari team, but also evidenced how fragile communication can be in borderline situations. In a sport where mutual trust between pilot and equipment is the axis on which championships are built, an error in synchronization can fracture more than a race. It can sow doubts, resentments and trigger leadership crisis. To understand Lewis Hamilton's refusal or Ferrari's wall to deliver DRS to Charles Leclerc in Imola, it is essential the cars and above all, of the hierarchy of opportunities that Ferrari had to prioritize. Imola not only represented one more career in the calendar. For Ferrari it was the race. The Emilia Romagna Grand Prix is one of the great temples of Italian motor racing, the scenario where the Scuderia feels more pressure to perform. It was also the first time that Lewis Hamilton competed at home for Ferrari, with all the symbolic burden that implies. And after a disastrous classification in which both he and Leclerc were eliminated in Q2, the team was already in recovery mode even that the traffic light went out. Leclerc would leave 11th, Hamilton 12th. A double disappointment that not only hurt in sports, but also raised a serious strategic challenge: how to minimize damage and maximize opportunities with a grille that is increasingly closed in performance. What made this situation even more delicate is that in the race, unlike the classification, Ferrari began to show recovery signs. Hamilton, in particular, found a very competitive career rhythm. He took advantage of the tire management, the errors of others and an excellent balance of the SF25 and stint largo to progressively placed in the position of fighting for a podium. His immediate goal was Oscar Piastri, the McLaren pilot, who rolled in third position. The real-time analysis of telemetry and the times by return gave Ferrari solid reasons to think that Hamilton could reach it in the last laps if he maintained the impulse. Leclerc, on the other hand, was caught in a secondary battle, dealing with Alex Albon and without enough rhythm to trace the head group. He had even suffered an incident with the Williams pilot, which would later force him to give position. That is, his ability to progress in terms of valuable positions had been compromised. And this is where the DRS dilemma takes shape. If Hamilton reduced his speed to allow Leclerc to enter his DRS detection zone, he would lose part of the necessary impulse to reach Piastri. The help asked was a direct resignation to a possibility of podium. For the team that represented a too expensive sacrifice. The orders were clear: the maneuver would not be authorized. The risk of losing a place on the podium, in a season where each point can be decisive for the construction championship, was unacceptable. This moment, far from being a simple disagreement between teammates, presented a work philosophy within the team: the need to make cold and calculated decisions even when they can tighten the relationship between their pilots. Ferrari chose to bet on the major result, even if that meant leaving one of its exposed pilots. In an ideal world, the two would have had opportunities to climb. But the reality of the track dictated that only one of them had the necessary tools at that time. The technical situation of the Leclerc car, affected by the disconnection with the tank timing system, also weighed in the evaluation of the equipment. Not having accurate information, his perception was outdated. "I thought they were in the last lap when 3 still subtracted." From his point of view, Hamilton had no margin of attack. But from the pit wall, with access to telemetry and real-time career, they knew that this conclusion was wrong. Acting under a wrong reading of the state of the race would have been an unforgivable strategic error. What Ferrari executed was a defense of the most pragmatic logic possible. Protect who still had a bullet to shoot. And although the decision was not well received by all sectors of the team or the fans in pure results, it had foundation. This was not a matter of ego or favoritism. It was a matter of calculation. Cold, hard, but indispensable in a championship as tight as that of 2025. The outcome of the episode in Imola not only closed a sports day, but opened an emotional crack in Ferrari's internal structure. After the refusal to DRS and the misunderstanding later, a tense ecosystem full of insecurities, egos and collision, and a lack of harmony that can be as corrosive as a poorly calibrated technical update was exposed. Because in Formula One, the real challenge is rarely found only in aerodynamic development or in the pneumatic strategy. It is in the capacity of our equipment to function as a single entity under pressure. The relationship between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, although cordial in the public, has always been marked by the inevitable friction that arises when two generations are competing for the same objective under the same roof. Leclerc, formed within the Ferrari structure, has been the visible face of the project for years. The talent that should take the Scuderia back to the top. Hamilton, on the other hand, arrived with the legend in tow, a 7-time world champion that leaves Mercedes not only for a sports opportunity, but for the emotional challenge of conquering with Red the story he was missing. This contrast of trajectories, far from being complementary, seems to have tension coexistence. In Imola, it was clear that there is no defined leadership. Leclerc asked DRS, thinking that his partner would understand the moment, would assume a temporary secondary role. Hamilton, with a podium in the sights and support of the wall, defended his line firmly. None was wrong since his perception. But the fact that they were not understood, that they could not build a common strategy in the midst of a critical career, reflects a deeper structural failure. Ferrari is not a team in technical reconstruction. It is an identity reconstruction team. It comes from years of instability, rude errors in pits, erratic tactical decisions, and excessive media pressure. Hamilton's signing represented a double bet, injecting experience and credibility, but also creating a new competitive culture. A culture that, until now, does not finish curdling. Because while one of his pilots struggles to impose his hierarchy from experience, the other still defends the place he considers his by right of emotional seniority. And all this intensifies in a season where McLaren does not loosen, where Red Bull is still lethal in execution, and where Mercedes threatens to return. The margin of error is minimal. Each lost point, every erroneous decision, each misunderstood gesture is amplified. In that sense, the DRS incident was not just a communication failure. It was a symptom that Ferrari is still not clear if he is building a team to win as a block or if he is simply betting on two individual talents that live under the same roof without a common long-term plan. Leclerc's frustration not only came from the timely moment of the race. It was the accumulation of years of delivery without reward, of being the flag of a project that now shares with a living myth. Hamilton, meanwhile, cannot afford errors. He knows that the clock runs against him. He knows that his legacy cannot afford to fail in Ferrari. Therefore, each maneuver counts. Each podium weighs. And that's why he decided not to give in. Not by ego, but out of necessity. What comes to Ferrari is more than a series of races. It is a redefinition process. Can this team capitalize on your internal talent and build a real synergy among your pilots? Can the strategy wall exercise authority and leadership when emotional crossfire threatens to overflow? These are the questions that open after Imola. And the answers will not arrive in a quick lap. They will arrive, if they arrive, in the way this team decides to evolve. As a set or as a sum of individualities that will be collided sooner or later. What happened in Imola was much more than a criteria difference between teammates. It was a raw demonstration of what happens when the internal gears of an elite Formula One team are not perfectly synchronized. It was a reminder that even with two of the most talented pilots of the grill, success is not built only with skill at the wheel, but with shared vision, precise communication, and a technical leadership that has the emotional pulse of the team under control. And in Ferrari, for now, that balance is still fragile. Now, the big question is how Ferrari will evolve from here. Will we see a team that learns from their mistakes and strengthens its internal communication, or a team that continues to accumulate friction until one of them stops in an irreparable conflict? Can Leclerc accept sharing leadership with a figure as imposing as Hamilton? And can Hamilton keep its focus and patience if the team does not respond with the level of execution to which it is accustomed? This is just beginning. The next races will be a test not only for Ferrari's rhythm, but for its cohesion as an organization. Because while the rivals refine their weapons and add strategic points, Ferrari must decide what type of equipment wants to be in 2025. One that reacts to the pressure or one that imposes respect from the tactical authority.